Today's theme will be when you lose everyone, when you lose everyone. And it's taken from the story of David. As you can remember, David was someone who became famous. And you can imagine being famous, you would have lots of friends, lots of people in your corner that would be looking out for you, looking up to you. Especially after David killed Goliath. So David experienced a special moment in his life where the high priest came and that was Samuel, the prophet, rather, came and anointed David to be the next king of Israel. And so this must have been quite an honor. David came from a poor household, nothing special. But now it was foretold that he would be the next king. But he was still a young man. However, when the nation was under attack and being taunted by this giant Philistine Goliath, David felt it was time to act. Everyone in the Israelite army was afraid to go up against Goliath, but David was not afraid. And he spoke out and he spoke up on behalf of his God and his people. Eventually, he was allowed to go out to the battle lines and fight Goliath. And as you know, he won that battle. He won that battle. And with that came fame, came attention. The king of Israel at the time, Saul, favored David and allowed David to come and work in the palace. And David would play the harp there for Saul. And so you would imagine everything is going great for David. He's now got this position in the palace. He's playing the harp for the king, and everything seemed to be going well. But David started to develop uh, more fame than Saul. It says even the women were making songs that were saying, you know, Saul was this mighty, but David was even more mighty than that. And that really made Saul angry. It made him jealous. And so Saul started to get the urge to want to kill David. And so while David was playing the harp, Saul took a spear. He tried to pin David to the wall. Somehow, David was able to escape, move out of the way. But even though he had kind of a hostile work environment, David still, surprisingly enough, would continue to associate with Saul. And Saul was a little bit messy. So Saul started thinking maybe I can start a marriage alliance with David. So Saul started trying to give David his daughters to marry. And he found out that one of his daughters had a crush on David. And so he's like, okay, this is perfect. And so Saul reasoned in his mind that he could use the fact that there was some type of spark between his daughter and David to get David sort of lulled into a false sense of security. And then Saul could make his move and kill David, which was ultimately Saul's intention. And so he had his daughter married to David. And everything should have been okay. But Saul's intentions became clear at chapter 19 of First Samuel. So if you'd like to join me there, we're going to chapter 19 of First Samuel. And verse 1, it says, Saul later spoke to Jonathan, his son, and all his servants about putting David to death. Since Saul's son Jonathan was very fond of David, Jonathan told David, my father Saul wants to have you put to death. Be on your guard in the morning and go to the secret place and remain hidden. I will go out and stand next to my father in the field where you will be. I will talk about you to my father, and if I learn anything, I'll be sure to tell you. So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. He said to him, the king should not sin against his servant David, for he has not sinned against you, and what he has done for you has benefited you. He risked his life to strike down the Philistine, so that Yahweh brought about a great victory for all of Israel. You saw it, and you were overjoyed. So why should you sin against innocent blood and having David put to death for no reason? Saul listened to Jonathan, and Saul swore, as surely as Yahweh is living, he will not be put to death. Afterward, Jonathan called David and told him all the things. Jonathan brought David to Saul, and David continued to serve. So at this point, it seemed like everything was okay. And so David is there serving Saul, and Saul has some ideas. He figures, I'm going to send David out to battle to go out against the Philistines, and then maybe he'll die in battle. But David kept getting victory after victory. And so that just made Saul more angry. Verse 8, it says, and wartime broke out again, and David went out and fought against the Philistines and struck them down with a great slaughter, and they fled before him. But a bad spirit from Yahweh came upon Saul when he was sitting in the house with his spear in his hand while David was playing the harp. So Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, who drove the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped during that night. Saul later sent messengers to David's house to watch it, to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, told him, if you do not escape tonight, tomorrow you will be a dead man. Immediately, Michal let David down through the window so that he could run away and escape. So perhaps they're recognizing that their house is under watch, under surveillance. And she's like, you got to get out of here because these guys are following you. If you try to leave out of the front door tomorrow, they're going to kill you. So David heeds her warning and he escapes out of the window. Verse 12. Immediately, Michal let David down through the window so that he could run away and escape. Michal took the teraphim statue and placed it on the bed, and she put a net of goat hair at the place of the head, and she covered it with a garment. Saul now sent messengers to take David, but she said, he is sick. So Saul sent the messengers to see David and told them, bring him to me on his bed to have him put to death. So you see, Saul is stopping at nothing. He's sick, no problem. We'll kill him anyway on his sick bed. Verse 16. When the messengers came in, there was a teraphim statue on the bed and a net of goat hair where the head would have been. Saul said to his daughter, Michal, why did you trick me like this and send my enemy away so that he could escape? And Michal replied to Saul, he said to me, send me away or I will kill you. And there starts the lie. Now David is off in the wind running away from Saul. And Michal doesn't say, I sent him away, but to preserve herself, maybe her image in her father's eyes, she says, he told me I had to send him away. Otherwise, he was going to kill me. So now David's starting to develop a bad reputation here in Israel, where he was once in a great favored position, being able to work for King Saul. So as it goes on in chapter 20, it says, David ran away from Naioth and Ramah. However, he came to Jonathan and said, what have I done? What is my offense? How have I sinned against your father for him to seek my life? At this, Jonathan said to him, it is unthinkable. You will not die. Look, my father will not do anything great or small without disclosing it to me. Why should my father hide this matter from me? This will not happen. So at this point, Jonathan is still thinking the best of his father. No, I don't think he's going to try to kill you. If he does, he'll at least let me know. Because why would he do all this and not even tell me? I'm his son. So David swore further and said, your father surely knows that I have found favor in your eyes, and would say, do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be upset. But as surely as Yahweh is living, and as surely as you are living, there is only one step between me and death. Then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do it for you. David said to Jonathan, tomorrow's the new moon, and I'm certainly expected to sit with the king and eat. You must send me away, and I will hide in the field until the evening on the third day. If your father misses me at all, then say, David begged me for permission to go quickly to his city, Bethlehem, because there's a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If if his response is, that's fine, it means peace for your servant. But if he becomes angry, then you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. Show loyal love to your servant, for you have brought your servant into Yahweh's covenant with you. But if I am guilty, put me to death yourself. Why turn me over to your father? To this, Jonathan said, it's unthinkable to suggest that about you. If I learn that my father is determined to harm you, would I not tell you? So David and Jonathan came to an agreement that Jonathan would talk to his father at the table where they were all supposed to be eating together. If if Saul seemed upset that David wasn't there, then that would mean trouble for David. But if Saul felt peaceful about the situation, then that would mean peace for David. That way, Jonathan would get to see that Saul is really trying to kill David. At verse 18, Jonathan said, Jonathan then said to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed from your seat will be vacant. By the third day, you will be missed even more. You must go to the place where you hid the other day and stay near there. I will then shoot 3 arrows to one side of it as though I were shooting at a target. When I send the attendant, I will say, go find the arrows. If I say to the attendant, look, the arrows are on this side of you, get them, then you may come back. For as surely as Yahweh is living, it means everything is peaceful for you and there's no danger. But if I say to the attendant, look, your arrows are beyond you, then go, for Yahweh has sent you away. So now he's made an arrangement. If he says the arrows are over here, that means David's fine. If he tells the servant the arrows are beyond him, then that's David's cue, who's going to be hiding there in the field, that David needs to go on the run. So David hid in the field when the new moon came. The king was sitting in his usual seat by the wall, Jonathan facing him. Abner was sitting at Saul's side, but David's place was vacant. Saul did not say anything that day, for he said to himself, something has happened so that he is not clean. Yes, he must be unclean. And then the day after the new moon, on the second day, David's place continued vacant. Saul then said to Jonathan, his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David begged me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, please permit me to go because my family has a sacrifice in the city, and my own brother summoned me. So if I have found favor in your eyes, please let me slip away to see my brothers. And that is why he's not come to the king's table. Then Saul became enraged with Jonathan and said to him, you son of a rebellious woman, do you think that I do not know that you are choosing to side with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother? As long as the son of Jesse is alive on this earth, you and your kingship will not be firmly established. So now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. However, Jonathan said to his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? At that, Saul hurled a spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. Jonathan immediately rose up from the table in the heat of anger, and he did not eat any food on the second day after the new moon, for he was upset over David, and he and his own father had humiliated him. Imagine that. You're just sitting, should be a family meal, right? So simple. But the father becomes so upset that you allow David to go and do a religious ceremony with the family that he starts yelling at you in front of everyone, saying that you shamed the whole household. And then he goes as far as to try to kill you, your own father. This was humiliating from Jonathan's standpoint. And so, as was the plan, Jonathan got up in the morning, verse 35, went out to the field for the appointment with David, and the young attendant was with him. And he said to his attendant, "Please run and find the arrows that I shoot." And the attendant ran, and Jonathan shot the arrow beyond him. And the attendant reached the place where Jonathan had shot the arrow. Jonathan called out to the attendant, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" Jonathan called out to the attendant, "Hurry, go quickly. Do not delay." And Jonathan's attendant picked up the arrows and came back to his master. The attendant did not understand anything about the matter. Only Jonathan and David knew what was meant. And Jonathan gave his weapons to his attendant and said, "Go, take them to the city." When the attendant left, David rose up from the place where he was hiding, and then he fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other, and they wept for each other. And David wept the most. And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of Yahweh, saying, 'May Yahweh be between you and me and between your offspring and my offspring forever.'" And David rose up and left, and Jonathan went back to the city. At this moment, David's life changed entirely and forever, because now David was on the run. He didn't have his place in the palace. He didn't have an army that he could command where he would go out and face the Philistines. He didn't have his wife. He had no one. He wasn't with his father. He wasn't with his brothers. He was just on the run alone. He had nothing, not even money with him. He had to stop at a temple and ask for the temple showbread so that he would have something to eat. He was truly on his own. How do you think David felt at a time like this? David had to focus on his survival. And so when he was at the temple, he said to the priest, "Is there a spear or a sword here at your disposal?" This is 21, 8 and 9. And he says, "I did not take my own sword or my weapons with me because the king's mission was urgent." To this, the priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, to whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, is here, wrapped up in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want, take it for yourself, because it is the only one here." And David said, "There's none like it. Give it to me." That day, David rose up and continued his flight from Saul. And so, as he went out, he actually had the sword of Goliath, the giant Philistine that he killed, with him. And David would continue to find what he could do so that he could still serve Yahweh. And so he would look for ways to protect the nation of Israel from the outside. So when there were marauder bands or enemy armies on the outskirts, David would fight against these marauder bands and enemy armies. As he was out there, David started to find some loyal friends who would be with him in his flight. And they would camp with him out there in the wilderness. And these men started to multiply. There were soon 100, 200, 400 men who were there with him. And these men would be able to act as like an outskirt army protecting the nation of Israel. Imagine you're protecting the nation where the king of this nation is trying to kill you. A confusing situation that David was in. David didn't know who he could trust when he would meet other rulers from enemy nations. He didn't know if he could trust them. He may have felt alone, but he started to develop his own tribe out there as he pursued purpose. And so David's situation gives us lessons that we can learn. What's special about David is that he never lost his trust in Yahweh. He always looked to Yahweh to help him so that he would know what to do. For instance, at chapter 23, it says, "In time, David was told, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are raiding the threshing floors. So David inquired of Yahweh, should I go and strike down these Philistines? Yahweh said to David, go, strike down the Philistines and rescue Keilah. But the men of David said to him, look, we are afraid while here in Judah. How much more so if we go to Keilah against the battle line of the Philistines? So David inquired once again of Yahweh. Yahweh now answered him, rise up, go to Keilah, because I will give the Philistines into your hand. So David went with his men to Keilah and fought against the Philistines. He carried off their livestock, struck them down with great slaughter, and David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. So this is the way David was living his life now. He would find out, oh, there's an attack over here. There's something happening over here on these outskirt villages. And David would take his men and go and fight against the enemies of God's nation. And he would destroy them. But notice, it wasn't just David being impetuous. Did you notice what he did before he went out to fight? He inquired of Yahweh. He prayed. He wanted to get God's direction in everything he did. This is a good lesson for us as we move forward in our life, in our service to God. At first, it may seem very exciting. We're learning the truth from the Bible, but we may start to find that we become isolated from some of our friends or our family. Some of them may be well-intentioned, but they may tell us to stop studying the Bible. They may make us feel like we've lost our mind or we've joined a cult. Whatever the case, we're determined to continue demonstrating loyalty to our God, Yahweh. As was in the case with David, he lost people. We may lose people. In fact, when Jesus was on earth, he said, do not think I came to bring peace to this earth. I came to bring not peace, but division, a sword, to divide people against members of their own household, so that mother will be against daughter and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law and son against father, father-in-law against son-in-law and brother against sister. He was naming members of the household, saying that you guys might be in the same family, but become like enemies. And that's exactly what the truth does. It divides us. It doesn't necessarily mean that our family life is going to become peaceful, and that all of our friends are going to stick around and stick close to us. It could be just the opposite. So when you lose people, it's important that you don't get into the mindset of feeling like you've lost everything. Because Jesus also said, to those who have lost mothers and brothers and fathers and sisters for my sake, he will gain 100 times more everything he lost now in this system of things and in the future in paradise earth under God's kingdom. And so that has to be our mindset, is that we have that trust, that faith in God. And as we experience problems, and we will experience problems on top of our problems. In fact, while David was fleeing from Saul in the wilderness, he had one problem, which is that he had to leave his nation and the palace and the capital where he was feeling safe and he was popular. But now he had other problems because now he had the men who he had to take care of who were camped out with him. And then he had problems on top of that because then he had to fight against the enemy nations. And then he had problems on top of that because Saul would then come and try to chase him down. In fact, there's one example here in verse chapter 24. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 24. It says, as soon as Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, they told him, look, David is in the wilderness in En-gedi. And Saul took 3,000 men from all Israel and went to look for David and his men in the rocky cliffs of the mountain goats. Imagine that. Saul got 3,000 men to chase David. David. It's one guy. And yeah, he had his people. So maybe Saul's like, well, I have more people. I'm the king. And so he gets 3,000 men. David only had like in the hundreds of men, like a few hundred men. Saul took 3,000 men to go chase David. And as you read through the story, Saul's pursuing, but he's never catching David. Why? Because Yahweh was with David. At one point, while Saul was sleeping in a cave, David actually snuck over to the cave with one of his right-hand men with him. He went into Saul's cave where Saul was sleeping while Saul was on the pursuit trying to kill David. And David actually cut off a piece of Saul's coat. And he walked away. He went to where it was safe on another mountain on the other side of the valley. He holds up Saul's piece of coat. And he says to Saul, hey, I could have killed you. Leave me alone. Stop trying to kill me. He figures he's going to send a message to the king. But this, along with other mistakes that David makes, ends up hurting his conscience. How come? Because sometimes David was human and he would forget to ask Yahweh first before he did something. He would forget to ask for permission before he did something. And it's a good lesson for us. Although we might come up with some good ideas for how we want to solve our problems, there is no greater problem-solving technique than to pray. We need to pray first before we act so that we can consider our steps, so that we're meditative before we make a move. We need to put that reliance and that faith in God so that we can be like Jesus, who said, I do nothing of my own initiative. I do nothing of my own initiative, but everything I do is the will of my Father. So let's be determined to imitate David's example and Christ's example and do nothing just of our own volition, but to dedicate ourselves to the service of our Father, Yahweh.